Hello, I'm Doug McConnell, and we've got some great discoveries for you out here along the open road.
We'll follow the footsteps of the first Europeans to see San Francisco Bay 250 years ago and had no idea what they were looking at. We'll see where members of the Gaspar de Portolá expedition nearly perished before receiving generous aid from native Ohlone people who guided the expedition up the San Mateo coast. We'll learn why Portolá was disappointed by his accidental discovery and why this first encounter between Europeans and native people in the Bay Area soon led to tragedy for the Ohlone and the birth of modern California.
Oh, this is one of the best views of San Francisco Bay. The city's gathered all around, SFO right down below. You can even see Mount Diablo in the distance. Well, it was on this ridge in November 1769 that the bay was seen for the very first time by people of European heritage. Members of a Spanish expedition have been struggling their way northward for many months from Baja California in search of Monterey Bay. Well, they didn't identify that bay, but they stumbled into this one. And the human history of Northern California changed forever in profound and poignant ways.
For hundreds of years, European merchants and pirates plied Pacific waters off Northern California without ever sighting San Francisco Bay, until 1769, when Juan Gaspar de Portolá led the first overland expedition up the California coast and eventually across these lands where native Ohlone people had lived for many thousands of years.
This is a pretty significant point in California's history, both for native people and for the rest of us.
The native people living here generously welcomed these strange and desperate travelers with food and guidance, never imagining the dire consequences that would eventually befall them.
Reality is that our people almost got wiped out.
2019 marks the 250th anniversary of that first fateful contact, which triggered on these shores a tidal wave of social change, sweeping the Ohlone towards the brink of extinction and giving birth to modern California.
None of us would be here, for better or worse, if it wasn't for what happened right at this spot.
San Mateo County is commemorating this historic event with the establishment of an interpretive trail we'll all be able to follow.
San Mateo County is working with many other open space groups, including State Parks, my agency, to try and create a route that replicates or follows as best as possible the original route of exploration.
Portolá's journey began in Loreto in Baja California. Over 11 arduous months, 64 men with 200 horses and mules ventured northward in search of Monterey Bay, described by Spanish seafarers 167 years earlier. They saw that bay, but failed to recognize it and moved on. We pick up their trail close to the Bay Area, stopping briefly at Pescadero Marsh, San Gregorio, and Pacifica, before climbing Sweeney Ridge to see San Francisco Bay and descend to Portolá's final destination at what's now the city of Palo Alto. But we begin our own expedition at Rancho del Oso in Big Basin State Park.
It looks like it might have looked in 1769, yeah?
Yeah.
Absolutely. The only thing missing are the grizzly bears and the tule elk.
But we have the tule.
Greg Castro, a direct descendant of native Ohlone people, and Mark Hilkema, Santa Cruz District Cultural Resource Manager for California State Parks, lead me to a significant place in California's history.
It's ironic, I think, that this is a horse camp today. This is where the expedition hobbled its horses in the grass.
Right here.
Right here.
Wow.
A pasture for horses now, as it was then, this could have been the end of the expedition for the exhausted men who arrived here, lost, starving, and dying of scurvy.
Some of the soldiers were so ill that the expedition stopped, laid them out on the grass, and Father Crespi gave last rites, supreme unction to them, thinking that this would be the ending point for those soldiers and that they would be buried here.
Wow, they were starving, they were weak, they just couldn't maybe go on, huh?
Right.
Here along the banks of Waddell Creek, Portolá almost turned back. History hung in the balance.
I think it's amazing that history is faded by such a fine line that if they had stopped here, they would have returned all the way back to Baja and never known about San Francisco Bay and actually spared the native people what was yet to come.
It would have been a dramatically different history, at least.
As fate would have it, the sick and famished men just happened to eat some native manzanita berries here, full of vitamin C. Their scurvy swiftly subsided, and they were just strong enough to continue a few more miles to an Ohlone village in Quiraste Valley.
So we greeted them, gave them safe passage, fed them perhaps, and then helped them continue on to the next community, not knowing they would come back, not knowing the after effects and the future history that was going to happen.
Ohlone culture is ancient and rich. This deer hoof rattle, like all their traditional tools and technologies, comes from the land the Ohlone have long depended upon.
We developed an intimate connection with the land that I think would benefit people today. And that knowledge is in the native people, it's in the communities, and it's in the ground in these sites that people can access. And that's, to me, is the important part of saving and conserving these places.
Led by Ohlone guides, the expedition veered inland, following current Cloverdale Road to a village near the present-day community of Pescadero and a thriving marsh just downstream.
It was loaded with waterfowl, elk, you've got migratory fish.
For many millennia, the Ohlone carefully tended this land, burning and pruning it frequently to allow its natural abundance to flourish. There's much in the 21st century we can learn from their ancient wisdom.
We believe because of the land is alive, that the knowledge is still there. So even now, Ohlone people, Yokut people, all the people of California, and even the newcomers can go out in the land and still learn from it because the knowledge is still there.
Native guides next led the expedition to what's now San Gregorio, then the village of Ohlone, the root word for Ohlone. The Ohlone are not a single tribe, but 50 tribes spread throughout the San Francisco and Monterey Bay regions.
Our blood, our bones, our essence is here. And that just strengthens the bond that we have with our landscapes of wanting to protect it and make sure those ancestors are taken care of, as well as the land itself.
Despite all the changes, Portolá and his native guides might well recognize this now largely protected terrain of the gorgeous San Mateo coast, saved from suburbanization with strong public support. Its many public parks and open spaces beckoning us to forge our own bonds with the Ohlone and their sacred land. The trail north traversed Montera Mountain to the village of Puristock, now the Sanchez Adobe Historic Site in Pacifica. We're greeted there by what Greg calls an animal ancestor, a messenger from the elders, acknowledging our presence where Portolá was welcomed again and camped. Just 17 years later, this was to become an outpost of Mission Dolores in San Francisco, with tragic and long-lasting outcomes for the Ohlone.
And at this outpost, most of the coastal tribes that we just visited in our journey were brought in here. This is where the conversions went on. And once you checked in at the mission, you were not free to leave.
Independent and self-reliant for countless generations, the Ohlone were cut off from their lands and their ways of life. Disease, death, and cultural devastation followed, but not total eradication. The Ohlone survived, and now, so do their dreams for the future.
Acknowledging the history that really happened is a really important part of, I think, the healing that we all have to do. And to me, that's what really this work is on the Portola Trail, is about not just acknowledging history, but healing from it.
When we come back, Portolá finds San Francisco Bay in tremendous disappointment, having no idea what this body of water might be and might become. OpenRoad is made possible by the generous support of our underwriters, dedicated to protecting our natural and historical treasures in the Bay Area and beyond. Additional support is provided by these institutions, also caring for our special environmental and cultural legacies and making them accessible to each and every one of us, now and for all time.
Well, that's the city of Pacifica down below where Sanchez Adobe is and where Portolá and his expedition found shelter and welcome from another Ohlone village. Then, on November 4th, 1769, the expedition ascended these mountains just to the east in hopes of spotting the supply ship they'd long been waiting for. Instead, they spotted something different.
Still searching for Monterey Bay, the Portolá expedition followed its scouts uphill to see what they had discovered 2 days earlier. And now, so do we.
Pacifica right below us. We're about a mile from Sanchez Adobe, right?
That's correct, yes. Right at the end of Fassler Avenue.
Uh-huh.
Joining us are Kevin Woodhouse, City Manager of Pacifica, Deidre and Jerry Crow with the Pacifica Historical Society, and Mitch Postal, President of the San Mateo County Historical Association.
This is a gateway to, these historic hills.
Here at the end of Fassler Avenue, Pacifica is installing a small parking lot to improve this entrance to the Golden Gate National Recreation Area.
It's a great opportunity to interpret this area and let people relive that hike up the hill to the discovery site.
It's a steep climb to the top, but we're rewarded with spectacular views. And so was the expedition.
Wow. There it is. November 4th, 1769, and holy cow.
On what's now Sweeney Ridge, Portolá's men became the first with European heritage to spy San Francisco Bay. But it wasn't what they were looking for. No Spanish ship stocked with provisions, and surely not Monterey Bay.
November 4th, 1769.
Yeah.
Portolá was a very disappointed man.
Yes. He wrote in his diary he had found nothing.
Though Portolá had no idea what this body of water was, he'd actually discovered one of the world's finest harbors, ringed by native villages.
It turned out to be a very cosmopolitan landscape, much like we see now, the cities of Palo Alto, San Carlos, Mountain View, and so forth. You can almost substitute tribal names for those places because they too were distributed in cities and towns and villages all up and down the peninsula here and across the landscape.
Today, the bay's ringed by thriving cities, San Bruno down below, and famous landmarks such as SFO. Much has changed, but some has not.
Today's view is not going to show us a tremendous amount of marshes that extended out into the bay. Mostly that's all gone. But the blue of the bay actually is pretty much the way you would have seen it.
From these ridges, we can see the present, but imagine the past, as Portolá and those before him might have experienced it. Thriving marshes and life on the wing filling the skies.
I close my eyes and I can hear the birds, and I can hear the ocean crashing. I can feel the soft breezes, and they did the same thing 10,000 years ago.
Portolá's chance encounter with the bay would soon and forever transform all life in California, setting forces in motion that have led to the world we see below.
This was a big occasion because it marked the beginnings of the Spanish colonial era, and so it's the beginning of something very important, and it also marks the end of something too.
From Sweeney Ridge, Portolá's expedition descended southward towards the bay, as do we with Mark Hilkema.
So after Sweeney Ridge, the expedition came down here on the peninsula, yes?
That's right. In fact, they hiked right through here, the Valley of San Andreas, and they encountered a very large number of people known as the Ohlone, which is one of the many tribes of Ohlone people. And here there were like 7 large villages.
These grand oaks just north of Woodside are not here by accident. They were first nurtured by Ohlone hands.
Actually, we call them oak orchards because the women were burning underneath the trees, get rid of the pests. You can see the acorns more. The trees are healthier because of the tending, and that's part of the reason why they grew so stately here. They were managed.
As the Portolá expedition traveled through California, it replaced native names for village sites with Spanish ones: San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Palo Alto.
The Portolá expedition is going through this valley. They named the creek Little San Francisco Creek. It's still called San Francisquito Creek. And they follow it down to the Bay Shore Plain. And that's where they see the huge redwood known as the Palo Alto.
This was Portolá's final Bay Area camp. From here, scouts explored a bit of the East Bay shoreline before everyone turned back towards home and into the pages of history. After Portolá, other Spanish expeditions soon followed by land and sea, and so did colonial settlement. Mission Dolores and the Presidio of San Francisco were founded just 7 years later, and only 7 decades after that came the gold rush. Modern California was forever off to the races. For the Ohlone, colonization meant cataclysmic change and profound loss, but not extinction. Survivors persevered. Their descendants and their traditions are with us today.
Please hear our prayer.
We still manage to keep those traditions alive within families and in other ways that here we are 2 centuries later and plus, and we're doing our ceremonies now. We're practicing our traditions. We're starting to speak our languages again.
They're also beginning to share their traditions with us. Culture bearers such as Linda Yamani are creating new treasures full of power to restore a people and inspire us all with the beauty and sophistication of Ohlone culture.
We were devastated, but not eradicated. And that's the history we want people to know. We're still here. We're still practicing our customs and bringing back traditions and reestablishing our presence in the world.
When we come back, a pathway into our past, the Ohlone Portolá Heritage Trail.
The pathway the Portolá expedition followed 250 years ago with the help of Ohlone guides up the San Mateo coast to the summit here on Sweeney Ridge and down to the bay below is one of the most consequential paths in all of California history. It's only fitting that it be permanently protected and honestly interpreted and become a pathway for us to follow across the landscape to discover the true lessons of our complicated heritage.
Such a pathway is being established, the Ohlone Portolá Heritage Trail, and Sam Hersberg, a senior planner for San Mateo County Parks, is involved in its creation.
The big dream really is to tell the story of this incredible encounter between the two people, the Ohlone, who had been here for so many years in San Mateo County, and the historic Spanish expedition that Gaspar de Portola led.
Sam's part of a major collaborative effort involving many organizations and agencies working to design, fund, and build the Heritage Trail. Still in its early phases of development, the Heritage Trail will eventually be 90 miles long, with about half of it already accessible for our exploration on existing trails, tracing portions of Portolá's path through San Mateo County, connecting the ocean to the bay and the present to the past.
This is an opportunity for us to teach the next generation about why we're here, how things developed, and I think it's a profound moment in some ways, kind of understanding our history.
In the years ahead, we'll be able to follow Portolá throughout San Mateo County, past its camps and Ohlone village sites, and receive the benefit of trailside interpretation along the way. From my perspective, there's no better way to relate to historical events than to actually be where they occurred, to feel the power of place, and be moved by the mystic chords of memory.
We live in such a special area. Looking back in time, understanding it through kind of a historical perspective, makes us appreciate what a special place we live and how important this expedition was to not only to the discovery of the San Francisco Bay Area, what led to the development of California as a state.
And all that followed.
And all that followed.
When we come back, final thoughts on one of California's most consequential moments. Open Road is made possible by the generous support of our underwriters, dedicated to protecting our natural and historical treasures in the Bay Area and beyond. Additional support is provided by these institutions, also caring for our special environmental and cultural legacies and making them accessible to each and every one of us, now and for all time. In the fall of 1769, along this lovely and now largely preserved stretch of the San Mateo coast, and on this high ridge in what's now America's most visited national park, California's past faced its future. Ancient ways faced new realities, but none of the people present could have foreseen the full consequences of their almost accidental encounter, or the swiftness and scale of the change soon to follow. Little did they know that ways of life thousands of years in the making were about to end and be supplanted by very different values and dreams, and the birth of modern California as we know it today. As a member of a sixth-generation California family, I've long enjoyed wandering through these protected landscapes of ours, so many have worked so hard to conserve for the benefit of nature and us. And now as I do, with more knowledge about the people who enriched this region long before my ancestors arrived, I'll be looking at the land more closely and from a fresh perspective. And I'll be asking the Ohlone and other native tribes all around us in California many questions, seeking their insights about how we might learn to live in long-term harmony with the land as their people did, so that many generations from now we can ensure that all our people thrive in this precious place we call home. For more information about the Ohlone Portolá Heritage Trail and all the places we visited in this show, go to NBCBayArea.com/OpenRoad. Well, that's our show. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm Doug McConnell, and we'll see you next time right here with more discoveries along the open road.